Now we'll move right along to our final panel of the summit on asset management. Connecting to the depth element of this year's theme, asset management is all about maximizing the finite resources of a hotel property.
This panel will be led by Matthew Arrants, president of Arrants Coles and former president of Hama North America. Alongside him will be Alison Hargreaves, senior portfolio manager for Archer Hotels Capital. Please give a big round of applause to welcome them onto the stage.
Thank you. Thanks for the warm introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all. Please.
Thank you. Okay,
Just
sitting on
getting
the right
ourselves,
side.
Yep, getting ourselves oriented. Oh yeah, look at that, perfect. Well, good morning. Thank you so much for having us. It's really, it's an honor to be here and to be speaking at such a prestigious university or school, I guess. We're here to talk about asset management. I think Hans just gave a great presentation, and it's interesting. He's a tough act to follow because asset management is, by comparison, quite dry. But I think, as somebody said, follow the money, I think was one of the things that I heard. And as asset managers, we are focused on the money most often. That's kind of one of the primary drivers, if you will, to our work. And as asset managers, and when we're asset managers, we're representing ownership, right? We're acting as owners, and our goal and objective is to meet the owner's objectives, right? That's priority number one. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I also wanted to give you all a sense of how you become an asset manager, right? You don't graduate and then become an asset manager, and there's also different types of asset managers as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of those topics, but I thought first we'll start with just a little bit of background on how I became an asset manager and the type of asset management that I do, and then we'll hear from Alison as well. So I started washing pots and pans at a country club, worked my way up through F&B, and then switched to rooms, which was like a vacation after food and beverage. And then I went back to graduate school and got a master's degree, which was something I think Stowe had talked about. In fact, Stowe and I were classmates in Ithaca about 1 million years ago. So I went back there, and then I went back into operations after getting my master's, and then I went into consulting. I did market studies and appraisals for a number of years. I was an expert on the Boston lodging market in particular. And it was there that I worked with Alison at Pinnacle Advisory Group for a number of years before she left us and went overseas to London. I continued working in doing market studies, and then I gradually transitioned into asset management. I worked for one of our clients was Harvard University, and they were a great first client to have because all you had to do then was walk into any other school and say, I understand you need hospitality help, and by the way, I do all the work for Harvard, right? So that opened a lot of doors and led to, I was very active in the college and university space, and then what I call non-traditional asset management, or asset management for non-traditional owners. Right, so traditional owners, and Alison is a traditional owner with Archer, where they're focused on profit, right? That's and value enhancement is a priority, whereas my clients were focused on brand, right? Protecting the brand of the university and/or the school, or providing an amenity. I also consider airports, for example. Airport authorities own hotels, and I worked for the Orlando Airport Authority. They owned a Hyatt that I asset managed, and then also another example would be high net worth individuals. And I still work with a property that's owned by a high net worth individual that I'll talk about a little bit later. But that's sort of my trajectory. And then I was with Pinnacle for about 25 years, and I left Pinnacle Advisory Group, which was a regional, and I did work nationally. And I left and went on my own. And I founded the Arrants Company. And I joke that the Arrants Company has very strict policies about no ties, no airplanes and no employees. So I like to keep things simple at this stage. So anyway, so I founded the Arrants company about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of my projects. But first, I wanted to introduce Allison, and thank you for coming and joining me for this. Allison agreed to come speak at my request, and after 20, I don't think we'd been in touch for probably 20 years. I reached out of the blue and said, "Hey, how'd you like to come to Lausanne?" So.
And I think we'll touch on that, the importance of networking and the relationships that you build in your career. Good morning. It's so nice to see all of you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's my first time here at EHL, so I'm delighted to be here. It's absolutely beautiful campus. I guess a bit about me initially. It's always awkward speaking about yourself, but so just to give you a sense of my path into where I am now in asset management, and sitting here today to speak to you. I didn't come from a hotel background in terms of my family weren't in the industry. When I was younger, I did a little bit of traveling, went on a cruise, and thought, this will be fun. I think I'd quite like to go into hospitality. It really was that sort of just, this idea. I was lucky enough to I went to Cornell, and during my time there, obviously did quite a few internships. I worked in room service, doing the 4 a.m. shift, and worked in conferences and worked in various operation roles pretty much throughout either my time there or during my internships. Everything really aside from revenue management, which wasn't as much of a kind of a key segment as it is now for our hotels. And then, yes, I worked a bit with Matt in Boston, but the majority of my career has been in London. So in London for about 25 years now. I started my role post-university with Intercontinental Hotels Group, working in development, which was a really nice, I think, place to start coming out of university, because we had a bit of an eye on what was going on in the markets where we had flags, where we had brands, but also it was a bit of looking at the management contracts and sort of digging into the financial aspect of the deals we were looking at that time, mainly management agreements, which is that playing field has changed a bit in Europe. And after Intercontinental, I've worked in various roles in consulting. So back in Boston for a few years, then in London, doing valuation, feasibility. And I joined what was Host's European joint venture in 2007. So pretty much since the start, the genesis of the company I'm still with now, I joined Host. Many of you may know Host was previously Host Marriott. Host Hotels did a big deal with Starwood in 2006, where they acquired a huge portfolio, and with that came 6 assets in Europe. So they set up a joint venture with GIC, essentially the government of Singapore, and APG, which is the largest Dutch pension fund, and focused on owning and asset managing large upscale hotels in key city center locations. And pretty much that focus hasn't shifted too much, and I'll talk about it a little bit in the genesis of Archer, just to give you this background of what's behind me. At the end of 2018, it was a good joint venture. We had 2 funds. We were buying hotels, selling hotels, and in 2018, Host sold their share to the existing shareholders. So GIC and APG have been with us since the beginning, and that's when we became Archer Hotel Capital. So same portfolio, similar core team. At that time, there were 8 of us, based in London with an office in Amsterdam as well. We're a Dutch structure. And we've done, since that time, a few really exciting things I look forward to speaking to you about, both on the asset management side, on capital investment. So really focus on our existing portfolio. We've also bought and sold a few hotels along the way, which I'll touch on, and set up our own management platform as well. So we manage half of our hotels. Now we have 14 hotels, and that was subsequent to a deal that we did with Marriott, where we were able to convert some of the management contracts into franchises, post some large renovation projects, very large renovation projects. the number up here is 700 million euros of capex investment. That is accurate, if not a bit more. I think we're $750 million. We say we're spending on our existing hotels currently. The Palace Madrid is just mentioned up there because that was relaunched last week, so it's very exciting. The Palace Madrid is over 110 years old. It was relaunched as Luxury Collection. Most recently, we acquired the Shelbourne in Dublin, building a hotel in Seville in Spain. I think if we go on to the next slide, we might have some
Get the pretty pictures
yeah.
now.
So I won't go on too much, but these are, sorry if I'm blocking some of these, but the hotels we own and operate now. So key city centers, as I mentioned, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, and I particularly asset manage right now UK and Ireland. But with a small team, I get involved in our investments, CapEx projects, and everything in between, finance, treasury. So yeah, it's a bit about me and a bit about Archer. Hopefully some of you have been to some of these hotels and had good experiences.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would add is that Host, Allison mentioned Host, and I am involved in the North American chapter of the Hospitality Asset Managers Association, and Host is really a top tier, right? I mean, they're considered sort of the gold standard of in the world of hotel asset management. I'll just show you a couple of, just this slide here. I saw, yesterday I saw all these slides. Somebody, the Auberge presenter, he had all these beautiful pictures of all his great properties, some of which are competitors to my properties. And I thought, I don't have any pretty pictures, so I pulled these together to give you a sense. So you'd have something pretty to look at least briefly, before we get into the details. But these are the properties that I asset manage. The Ocean House is a Relais and Chateau property. It's also Forbes 5-star. It's actually a triple Forbes 5-star, so 5-star for the hotel, restaurant, and spa. And its sister property is the Weekapaug Inn and the Ocean House. We are in the midst of trying to acquire it. Ocean House manages Weekapaug Inn right now. We're in the midst of trying to acquire it. Ocean House, by the way, it's 49 rooms, 24 condominiums. 23 of the condos are in a rental pool. A number of food and beverage outlets. It does about $50 million in revenues a year. The average rate is about $1,300 US. So it's quite a complicated asset given its size. It's owned by a group of investors. There's one primary investor who's a gentleman named Charles Royce, who founded the Royce Value Funds, a mutual fund company. Anyway, so there's that. There's Weekapaug Inn, and then Hammett's Wharf is kind of a project that I'm quite proud of. Somebody that a colleague of mine who ended up buying a large waterfront parcel in Newport, Rhode Island, had a parking lot and said, "Hey, I can build a hotel and I can do 50 rooms. What do you think?" And I looked at the location and said, it was a very busy area. We wouldn't be able to do a lot in the way of amenities. It's quite loud. Newport is a big party town. It's on the water. And I said, can you do 84, make the rooms small, and do great public space a la Citizen M? And we did that. We got the room count up. And then one of the other key things we did is we leased out food and beverage. As Hans mentioned, food and beverage, and I think a lot of people have mentioned food and beverage. Well, everyone except for Jonathan, who's had tremendous success with food and beverage. Us, we asset managers find food and beverage a challenge, so we leased out our food and beverage there, and that's been a very successful project for us. We also, that same group and we acquired a former Holiday Inn in North Adams, Massachusetts, which is the corner of Massachusetts, Vermont, and New York. It's way out in an area called the Berkshires. There's a famous museum there, a contemporary art museum. We purchased that and converted it to the Hotel Downstreet. We've had some trouble with that in terms of occupancy for a number of reasons. Some of it's related to market. So we've decided to affiliate with the Ascend Collection, which is a soft brand of Choice hotels. And I tell you that because those are the kind of things that we as an asset manager, that was my role, is okay, well, we're struggling. We need to increase our occupancy. We need to do something. So this is one of the, we looked at a number of soft brands and selected that one. The other two projects there that are open is the Hyatt Place in Portland, Maine, which is near where I live, and then an interesting concept called the Docents Collection. And that is, my client owns a lot of real estate in the historic district of Portland, Maine, which is a tourist district. And what he's done is he's taken the first floor is very valuable real estate for retail. But the second, third, and fourth floors are all, Class B office space and not well used. So he's converted that to apartments, and we call that the Docents Collection. We rent them out. They're available via the GDS, also through OTAs, and Airbnb, right, would be the closest. There's no front desk, and there's no public space. You check in with a phone, and you use your phone to gain access, but you get an apartment essentially in the most desirable area of the city of Portland, Maine. So that's a really fun and interesting project and fairly new. It's it's serviced apartments in a sense, but without a lobby. More common here in Europe than it is in the States. And then under development, I've got a luxury property called the Promenade, which is it'll be 130 rooms. Right now, our management agreement is with Highgate. Some of you remember Nick Mellos spoke the other day. Just gives you a sense of the small, nature of the industry. And then we've got a project under early development stages called 45 Union, which will be a tower designed by Moshe Safdie, who designed Marina Sands in Singapore. And then 222 St. John Street is the other end of the spectrum. That it will be a Town Place Suites, 130 unit Town Place Suites in Portland. So anyway, those are some of the projects that I'm working on. I just want to sort of share that, and we can talk about in terms of the role of the asset manager. And again, my role is I work for clients, so I do third-party asset management. So my client owns the hotel, and I'm their sort of trusted advisor. Often they listen to me, sometimes they don't. The owner of the Ocean House does not listen to me, but he's been wildly successful regardless. So I think that's it for the slides. And the pretty pictures. I just wanted to get those out. So anyway, one of the things that I want to talk about, Allison, was getting into asset management. Can you talk a little bit about how you made the jump into asset management or evolved into being an asset manager?
Yeah, sure. I think this question comes up a lot, I think especially when we speak to students, and it's a great question in terms of the trajectory, how you get into it. I think if I look at our team and my colleagues that are in asset management, they have come from different paths, for sure. It's not all the same. Some were career general managers, worked their way up in operations and worked as GMs, and then sort of came to the money side of things, the finance side, ownership side. And some, maybe started their career in lending. I sort of came from a bit of operations, but more consultancy background. I think, obviously, in my role now, I said to Matt, quite often, so I'm meeting with our hotels, and there'll be 12 people from the management team sitting in a room, sort of staring at me, and, as the owner representative, and we have some great conversations, and we view it very much as, learning from one another, but ultimately I am there to drive value, and of course, I need to have a good understanding of the operation. I mean, we need to understand the basics, or I would look quite foolish, to be fair, in front of them. So I think it's important to have that foundation of some operational experience. But my view is it doesn't necessarily have to be, that you follow a specific path and you've come from operations. It could be through internships you've done. It could be through, specific coursework. Obviously, working in operations is second to none. But then, people come into asset management, I think, from all different angles. And because, what Matt mentioned earlier, and I know we're going to talk a bit more about it, but my role is it's not just looking line by line at the P&L and understanding the operations and looking at where we can maybe save some costs or push the revenue and looking at market share and all these great things. It's also sort of real estate asset management. So understanding, we're looking at leasing out spaces. We're looking at what the right capital expenditure programs are and all sorts. So you have to wear a few different hats. And I think some of that comes with experience and, obviously working with the right teams and getting some good training on the ground, whichever kind of path however you get there.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that that experience. And there was a debate in the States a few years ago. It seemed to be more common because there were a lot of general managers that then become asset managers and move on to that. And they would say, well, the general managers who became asset managers would say, well, we're better at it than you all, you who came from consulting, because we know where all the bodies are buried and we know all the tricks and all of that. And there's some merit to that, but there's also, at the same time, because asset management is so broad in terms of the amount of work you do, those general managers may know nothing about insurance or CapEx planning, or even their financial skills may not be quite as strong. So it's really a mixed bag, and I don't think, to Allison's point, that there's any one right answer on how you get there.
I think as well, you touched on the point, sort of, there's also the consulting companies, the big, and the JLLs and HVS of this world, and they may have an asset management team that could be a bit more light touch or general real estate asset management. And of course, they also have teams that work directly for owners, and they're doing quite in-depth sort of asset management like we do on behalf of the owners. So it's a bit of a broad spectrum, I suppose, depending on ultimately who your stakeholders are and who you're reporting into,
Right.
and what the purpose is.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's an interesting contrast in terms of our, in my world, doing third-party asset management versus you being in-house. What's and I'm going off script a little bit, but your sort of reporting. So for me, I have a monthly cycle, right, that follows essentially. I get financials on the 20th of the month. You probably get them earlier, and then so I'm quite busy between the 20th of the month and the end of the month. How is it? Because that sort of triggers things of when we start looking at how we did historically, not just the financials, but also bookings, booking pace, and whatnot. How is you have a?
Yeah. So for some of the hotels, I look at market share daily.
Yeah.
It's on, not all of them. Don't have enough time.
Well, yeah, the ones that are in trouble are the
Exactly. The ones that are in trouble, I will look at STR daily. We'll look at business on the books weekly in terms of pickup. We have monthly reporting cycles as well, very similar to you, and ultimately reporting into our shareholders every quarter. We do in-depth operating updates, and of course, if anything comes up in between, we are constantly in touch. And then we have board meetings reporting to our shareholders once a quarter. So it's our operational review and more strategic board review. So, I'm in touch with the properties I look after every week, absolutely. Visiting them, at least every month. But as I say, we view it as collaborative. It's not kind of badgering them. We're sort of long-term investors. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. So we're not looking to sort of buy, kind of scrub the P&L and sell. We are long-term, so we're looking at how do we really drive the long-term value of the hotels, and so that becomes a collaborative conversation for our hotels that are brand managed. And we work with Ennismore, so we have Hoxton hotels. You saw in the pretty pictures. I should have brought more pictures because I've got some beautiful pictures. And we work with Marriott and Hilton, and each have different strengths that they play to. So it's been really interesting working with all three.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that the long-term hold. My clients, my properties are all long-term hold as well, which is really where you want to be in asset management. The other types of asset managers might be receivers, right, where the owners handed the keys back to the bank. and the bank hires a receiver or an asset manager who's a receiver, and that can be a very challenging situation because there's not enough money, and you as the asset manager are trying to figure out where you're going to put what money in, and it's quite stressful. It's never fun.
You're essentially doing deals if you're not doing long-term asset management. You're sort of
Yeah.
ultimately you're more on the deal side, yeah,
Right.
which we get involved with as well, don't we?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of churning, and not quite as much fun because you're looking at the long-term value of the asset. So you're not, scrubbing, as you said, scrubbing the property. I thought maybe we talk a little bit about, and we touched on this in terms of our reporting and sort of a day in the life of an asset manager. Maybe just talk about some of the things, because to me, that's the best part about being an asset manager is the breadth of the work that we do, in that it encompasses so many different disciplines. And you want to talk a little bit about a day in the life?
A day in the life. Yeah, I think ultimately one thing is interesting is sort of having to prioritize your focus areas. So for some of the hotels, they're stabilized assets, they're running 90% occupancy, your market share is where you want it to be. And so that really becomes, that's tweaking, and it's having those conversations that are really, okay, where can we, drive a little bit more value? But maybe for those hotels, it's more of a strategic focus. It's, we are looking at leasing out restaurants quite a bit throughout our portfolio. When do we execute certain CapEx programs and such? So a day in the life, I guess because all of these things take time as well, whether you're working on a small lease. For the Hoxton in Holborn, we have a basement space. It used to be Chicken Shop. For any of you that know London, it was super successful back in the day. And now it's a interesting space, but it's a basement. It looks like a dive bar. I thought it could make a good dive bar, but we need to look at what makes money. And so for that, you still run a full highest and best use of that space. Does the hotel operate it? Does Ennismore operate it? Do we lease it out? So that's, one thing we've been working on, really interesting, seeing what, who from the market might want to come in there. And then you take the Hotel Arrants in Barcelona, completely different asset. We're spending over 200 million euros renovating that hotel and actually creating, it's a tower. Some of you may have been to the Hotel Arrants in Barcelona, big tower, very prominent on the seafront. And at the top of the tower, we will create a new penthouse hotel. It's being designed by Ken Folk out of the States. So, for that level of project, absolutely everyone in Archer Hotel Capital is involved in some way, in addition to countless project managers and cost analysis. There's so many people involved in that project. So a day in the life can be very different, I guess is what I'm saying, depending on the asset. For the most recent acquisition, the Shelburne in Dublin, quite a trophy for Dublin. That hotel absolutely bucks the market trends. So we're seeing Dublin market has its issues, and the Shelburne is just sort of operates because of its stature and the type of business, big group business coming, especially from the States. It operates kind of in its own bubble a little bit. So it's understanding that, but for that, it's looking at it's quite busy. When is the right time to change any of the F&B, renovate? You don't want to upset the apple cart too much, but that hotel, it sounds very dull, but in the basement, we're redoing all of the space. The guests won't see any of that really, but operationally, it's a huge challenge because you have to move housekeeping, you have to move your staff canteen, you have to move your changing rooms, and in a hotel where there's no free meeting rooms and you don't want to use guest rooms because then you're losing revenue. So, that's sort of an operational challenge that we get involved in. So I could go on and on. I'm sure we'll touch on some more examples, but every day is different, which makes it really interesting and challenging.
Yeah. Do you have a sense as to how much, I was trying to think of how much of my day is structured versus how much of it is, pop up.
Fighting fires?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, you're quite right in terms of when, there's obviously set reporting we need to do, which is standard, and a lot of meetings in the diary. as we all have. But I think, I don't know, maybe at least 50-50 is unscripted, unplanned, things come up, quick conversations with the different hotel teams, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's about right in terms of my daily life. I'm blocked 50% of my time is scheduled into meetings and whatnot, and then the other 50 gets filled quickly, right? It's either meant to be used for the reporting that I need to do or specific tasks that I need to do. And then, and the other thing that happens is that, and I'm sure this is the case for you, I will find that my day is full, right? 9 to 5 is when I'm doing meetings, and I'll have full days of, 9 to 5, and then I'm actually getting work done between 7 and 9, and 7 and 9 in the morning and 7 and 9 at night, actually, or on weekends in order to get caught up to get that uninterrupted uninterrupted time. One of the things that I have, because in the case of my, at the moment, a few of my clients are high net worth individuals. I will get, I've had several weekends where I've had to work. I have one client who likes to call me at 8 a.m. on Sunday mornings to chat about projects. Do you, you probably don't, you get a little bit less of that, I would imagine.
A bit less of that. I think there's some of that leading into sort of our, when we're reporting to our shareholders. And if our shareholders need something, then we pick up the phone. We answer the email.
You jump, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so for you, it's your shareholders, and for me, it's my owners or my clients.
Yeah. And, there's so many different stakeholders. Obviously, the brands, our own team, project managers, CapEx, but, and ultimately the shareholders, obviously if there's anything that occurs with our hotels, that health and safety, I mean, we didn't touch on the people side of things. I mean, that's quite a big part of our role as well, although I'm looking after hotels that are brand managed, so, a lot of that does lie obviously with the managers, but for the hotels that we are managing ourselves as Archer, that's a huge part of their, of their time is really, obviously preemptively, but looking at culture and training and all of these great things, but there's quite a bit of intensity with obviously managing the hotel and the teams you have in place, and we are across various jurisdictions in Europe, and each come with its own different level of complexity with unions and whatnot. Luckily, we don't have any issues, but. So that's another whole sort of facet, I think, of asset management, especially when you are owner operating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you have expertise, in-house expertise? So, for example, I touch on everything, and then I will hire outside counsel, right? So if I'm I will do the management company selection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll do the RFP and then the interviews and that whole process, and then make the selection. And then I'll work with outside counsel on the management agreement. Do you get involved with that, or do you have in-house expertise?
We do have in-house legal. I mean, we've acquired hotels really that, either come with a brand or that we're acquiring them VP. And then, with our relationships we have with the brands, then we sort of, we know our strategy and what we want to do with them. So we don't tend to get involved in an operator selection per se.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, by nature. But I imagine you probably spend a lot of
assets.
time studying the management agreement when you...
Yes. Yes. Yeah. A lot of the time is looking at the contracts, absolutely.
Yeah.
And mainly the termination clauses and
Yes.
looking at the contracts and when they expire and when we can sell vacant possession and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those are obviously, the management contract really sets the framework for the relationship between the asset manager and the operator. But again, it's sort of general guidelines, right?
Mm-hmm.
I rarely will pull out the contract. You always try to avoid that, right? As you were saying about the managing the relationship and keeping it collegial and professional, rather than the sort of scorched earth or confrontational.
Yep.
I thought we'd talk a little bit about asset management has grown quite a bit over the years, the role of asset manager. And I joke, I started in the industry back when somebody the other day was talking about how, about being screamed at. I think it was Johnny about, back in the day when you would be screamed at and then show up at work the next day, all, chipper and happy. There was that era. And Stowe and I were talking about a famous hotelier. I'm not sure if I can name him. But a very famous European hotelier who was in the States, who was known for being a screamer. There are quite a few. Even the ones that weren't known were behind the scenes. I had a GM who was, everybody thought that he was so wonderful and charming, and because he had a British accent in the States, and he was a tyrant, mostly just to me, I think, but. So anyway, I grew up in that era of hotels, but back in those days also, and I spent time in resorts, and that was a great time to be in hotel operations. The general manager of a resort was king.
Yeah.
Right? They had a car, they had housekeepers come clean their house, the chef would come over and make them dinner, and then they'd have these glamorous parties, and that's why I wanted to be a general manager. And then asset managers came along and ruined it. And they'd live on property. They just had these great lives. And then asset managers came, and I always joke, like, give me a great hotel and I will ruin it. And just take all the fun out of it, if you will. And so things really have changed. In our day, you would not hesitate to call somebody and say, hey, can you get me a room for whatever date? And it was just assumed that it would be comped. And that you just don't do that anymore. I mean, certainly I don't. I mean, at my property, if you want to come stay at one of my properties, I would be happy to help you, and I will give you a 30% discount. You're welcome. Anyway, that's all sort of a prelude to asset management, and it has grown. I jotted down some notes. The Hotel Asset Managers Association, the original North American chapter, was founded in 1992 with 6 members. There's now about 250 members and in North America, plus there are now chapters in Europe, Japan, Asia, Pacific, China, Middle East, and Africa. So it's really just exploded. Most of those started in 2012 to 2014, so it was primarily North America. And then it's grown. One of the reasons that it's grown is that in the U.S. in particular, it has to do with alignment, right, of interests. And that's really why asset managers exist, is because there's a disconnect between owner and operator, an inherent disconnect. And it's no fault of the operator. It's just the way that things are structured. And it's even more complex mostly in the States, where you have 3 different parties, right? You have owner, operator, and franchisee. And they each have their own interests, and they are not all completely in alignment, right? So the owner wants to enhance value, basically drive profitability. The operator wants to do that, but they're also, most of their fees come from the top line, the way that the management contracts are structured, but also they need to take care of their employees and think about their employees. And so, because they treat them as their employees. And they need to protect their brand, right? So they want to manage the most beautiful property that they can. So they will tell ownership, well, we need to have gold-plated, toilets. Because we need to be the best, right? And similarly for the franchisors, the Hiltons and the Marriotts. I remember Hyatt drove me crazy back pre-COVID. They came up with this new mandate where you had to have a 65-inch television in every guest room. You have any idea? 65 inches it took up like the whole wall. It was just ridiculous. And it cost, I don't know, it cost us $800 a room or $900 a room then to upgrade that to that standard. And there's a whole litany of examples of that. But that's sort of the reason that there are now asset managers, so that owners, and also because you have institutional owners who don't understand the business and aren't focused on it. So they need expertise or experts to focus on all those different elements. I don't know if you...
Yeah, sort of the European perspective, I think. So on my timeline there, when Host sort of came over to Europe, sort of asset management in that regard didn't really exist. Host was doing it in the States in terms of very operational asset management and having an in-house kind of database. So business intelligence, it's important to have data as well. We haven't really touched on that, but to have the data to be able to inform your decisions. But in my view, I'd say in the past 20 years being in Europe, and it's a little bit different depending which country by country, but I think a big change is the move away from the management agreement. When we were first here 2 decades ago, we were buying into management agreements. The brands were quite inflexible. The brands held the power. We've had a few heated discussions over the past few decades. And, you know, I mentioned the Palace Madrid rebranding as Luxury Collection. The Palace Madrid is now a franchise that we operate. We would have never gotten a franchise for a Luxury Collection hotel 10 years ago. But the brands have had to move on and see the owners like us, you know, we've set up our own management platform, and we are one of many who have done that. So I think the structure of the owner-operator has changed. And yeah.
Well, that's interesting, that point that, so you've taken over, so you as owner have created your own management company so that you can get alignment, right? And
yeah, absolutely. It's about alignment. It's being able to be agile, make quick decisions. Ultimately, it's about the value upon exit, because you know, you're selling the hotel free and clear of a management agreement. So that's the big kind of value add ultimately. But, you know, we noticed in COVID, we had a hotel called the Dilly in London. It was formerly Le Méridien Piccadilly. And at the time, the Dilly was our only hotel that was operated by a third party. And then COVID hit, and just how quickly they could pivot and we could make decisions in a situation where you have an operator, kind of an independent operator versus the big brands, which quite rightly had to make decisions that impacted their hotels globally, or certainly for us across Europe. And things were slow to change and slow to move and very slow to restructure. So yeah, that was really kind of, I mean, we sort of assumed it would be the case, but quite eye-opening at the time, just the difference. But, you know, the brands do, don't get me wrong, I hope there's branded people here, they do offer a lot. A lot of our hotels are still brand managed. And, you know, we think it's asset by asset. You sort of take a view on that and on the structure. And yeah, the focus of asset management can be different depending on that sort of ownership structure.
right. Yeah, it's interesting.
Owner-operator.
And you mentioned the unencumbered, right? So that's an important, it's a way, so we as asset managers are looking for ways to uncover value or unlock value, right? However that may be. And it can run from, you know, utilizing basement space or, you know, improving efficiencies from operations to management agreements, right? So negotiating a management agreement, being able to sell a property, when you sell a hotel, if it's not encumbered by management, it's going to sell for more money because you have a more potential buyers, and the broker can
Right.
tell the story that, oh well, if you manage this, you'll do so much better and make
It'll
so
be
much
worth
more
twice
money
as
than the
much.
people who are operating it now.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So, and then the other thing, one of the things that we do with that I try to do with management agreements, because I'm dealing with smaller properties, I will try to go for the shortest contract term possible, or the easiest outs, in order to have, because that, to my mind, keeps management's feet to the fire a little more in terms of their always wanting to perform.
I think it's kind of to round out that sort of the geographical point. You know, in the States, obviously the franchise model has been prevalent for a long time. Europe is moving that direction. Again, not every country, and moving at slightly different paces. And then you have the Middle East, which is probably the other side, you know, and still quite strong in terms of management contracts. So my friends that asset manage in the Middle East and our former colleague who is going to join us, his role will be very different because his owner is very different and what he's, that sort of relationship. So it's a different role to my role as sort of owner's representative in Europe and different to your role in the States. Because again, it's sort of, it's on that alignment piece is different. But, perhaps there are still some jurisdictions where you have a management agreement, the investors park their money there and, they want to know that the hotel's doing fine. They're maybe less concerned with getting into the nitty-gritty of the detail as perhaps we would be.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, it's kind of a testament as to the breadth of the within asset management of what you do. I thought we'd spend a couple minutes on, and then we'll take questions. Some of the things that are major issues for us right now as asset manager in the asset management world. What are the Hotel Asset Managers Association in North America? We do a survey of our membership every 6 months to see, what are you most worried about, right? So what are some of the things that are sort of top of mind at the moment, or your biggest headaches?
Biggest headaches. I think, I mentioned the capital expenditure program, so executing major capital projects, there's always going to be changes along the way, changes in cost and in timeline, and all of those have an impact to your budget, but they have an impact to the operations, and that's quite challenging throughout. As I say, whether it's a basement space or whether it's a new restaurant. I think kind of helicoptering up a bit in a macro standpoint. Actually, last week we had our first cancellation that's directly related to Doge, to Elon Musk's Doge goings on in America, excuse my voice, and that was a direct €500,000 cancellation in Dublin because of travel being restricted. So I think on a sort of macro level, I do worry about, here in Europe, we are quite reliant on, in many of our locations, on inbound U.S. demand. So I think that concerns me from a top-line revenue perspective, and we have a lot of conversations about that. And just interesting to have a live example. It was literally a couple of days ago where we thought, okay, interesting. But no, looking at CapEx, I think F&B we touched upon. Jonathan, you're doing great things, and you need to know what the secret sauce is, I think, and speak to you later. That's been a challenge across our portfolio, and we have license agreements with, top chefs, some of the top 50 chefs in the world. We have at our Edition Madrid property, and so those are license agreements. We have leases. We operate F&B ourselves, and across the portfolio, it's quite challenging. And it's more to some great things for us at our Hoxton hotels. And those are half leases and half operated by them. So F&B is definitely a big focus. I think, again, the people side of things, it's gotten better, but certain markets, it's still challenging to get the right team. It's getting more and more expensive. I think this year when we did our budgets, coming into this year, our budget process, every single hotel, we're looking at payroll increases, and not just payroll, but obviously government regulation that's impacting. So, in the UK, it's new national insurance minimum wage and all of these things. It makes it quite difficult. So our hotels, they're run well. They're run by very professional teams. But when you're constantly getting squeezed on the margin, it's tricky. And I think so. Not just to get in the right people, it is more expensive. Retainment, all those good things. Some of our hotels will have 50% turnover, and that's normal, and that's market. Right. And obviously the larger hotels where you'd expect a bit of that, but it sounds like quite a high number, and so that's intensive for HR. So I think F&B, CapEx, Elon Musk, if I name a few things that are concerning us, at the moment.
I think it's interesting. Labor is really interesting. In the States, there are unions and union contracts, and the union contract in Boston was just recently renegotiated, and the housekeepers in Boston in 3 years will make $80,000 US as an entry-level housekeeper. which is going to, and that's going to, I mean, right now they're at, probably 55. So all of those will constrict, right? They're going to impact the bottom line profitability of the hotels, all at a time when there's a lot of uncertainty
Yeah.
in hospitality. And it's interesting because I was thinking this morning about how like so many people have, so many of you have not really been through a downturn. I mean, there's the sort of the catastrophe of COVID, and then which was almost like biblical in nature. But other than that, it's easy to forget that this is a cyclical business, and we go up and we go down, and so.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a great point. Long term, we're very positive about
Yeah.
this industry. We're very positive about all of our markets in London. Absolutely. And it's why we're investing all of this, all the capital into the assets. Of course, there's blips along the way, but I think, and I think we're lucky in terms of Archer's portfolio being at the sort of upscale and luxury end where we have been able to increase rates to absorb those costs that you're speaking of. We're seeing at least across most of the European markets that mid-scale is tricky. You're seeing budget do okay, luxury do phenomenally well in many markets. Very expensive for people to travel. Great from our business, not so great when I'm trying to be, when I'm a customer myself, but very expensive.
I don't know how people do it.
But getting squeezed in the middle. But long term, we're very, very positive still. I mean, there's some, as we all know, you guys will be studying the trends and inbound travel trends. There's still some big markets that are opening up and coming to stay at our hotels in Europe.
Great. Yeah. Well, I thought maybe we'll take some questions.
Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
Go ahead, all the way.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having this panel today, and it was an insightful discussion. So I have two questions for you. First, as an hotel asset managers, you are an independent company. What would you do if you receive hotel asset management agreements in the same area for two competing hotels?
An asset management agreement. So if I can repeat the question, what would we do if we were offered asset management of two properties in the same market or management?
No, managing the assets in the same for the competing hotels in the same area.
Okay. So
go ahead.
So we have some cities where we have multiple hotels, but same stakeholders, same owner. So actually, it's a benefit because in some of the hotels, so in Paris, we do have certain of the functions that are clustered. So it's a financial benefit, and the teams work together. So yeah, but I think probably that's more of a question for you, Matt, I suppose. Can you asset manage two hotels that compete in the same competitive set? Do you? Do you now?
Actually, yeah, I have two under development. We'll see if they get built. That I'm asset managing two luxury hotels proposed in the same market. The way that I do it is I'm just very transparent with both of my owners. They know I was hired by one first, and then the other came and said, I'd like you to help me with this. And I went to the first and said, so-and-so wants me to help them. And so it is a little bit delicate, and I just focus on being as transparent as possible.
Yeah.
And as far as for managements, for the operators, I will negotiate in, you call it an area of protection, an AOP clause, into agreements where they can't have another hotel within a certain radius in order to avoid that, because you do end up, when you have separate owners, you're constantly, and the same operator, you're like, well, how come you're giving more business to her than to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean, I do have that situation now in Dublin, where the Shelburne is Autograph Collection with Marriott, and we have the Conrad Dublin, which is Hilton. So of course we don't share, because it's a different brand. We don't share their data. It's a small market there, though. They know, but so internally, obviously, we have all of the data, which helps us. And there's, even though they're the same market, there's different challenges with each hotel. But we can't share their data directly.
Thank you so much.
go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for speaking today. My question is for either of you. So, have you noticed any changes or trends as more asset management companies from America, like Davidson or I believe Hotel Ave, are trying to go into the European market?
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's positive though, and I think it has to do with what we discussed about just how the structure of hotel ownership has changed. So, there are more owners that want independent operators rather than having brand managed hotels. So I think it's only natural that that shift has occurred, and it's really been in the past 10 years. Where you see, yeah, either more ownership companies have a management platform, or you have growing like Hamilton Pyramid and David's, the ones you mentioned, Aimbridge, et cetera, doing operations. So yeah, absolutely, it's a trend, and I think the operators are very aware of this trend as well, and they're having, as I said, they're having to perhaps be a bit more flexible with their structures and when they're looking at management contracts or franchise agreements. So, and yeah, we were talking earlier. Definitely one of the biggest changes in Europe, seeing that sort of the growth of that expertise. I would say because it's more the expertise and the data maybe didn't exist certainly 20 years ago.
right. Yeah, certainly. The
Yeah.
data didn't. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Maybe this side of the room. Oh, anybody? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
In terms of risk and return, why would clients choose to invest in a hospitality asset management firm as opposed to other means of investment?
Why do, yeah, why do clients choose to invest in hospitality or hospitality asset management?
Hospitality asset management.
Well, I mean, in my case, it's, my high net worth clients, they just want somebody to call, right? So that they're less worried about, I guess, to your point, it mitigates risk, right? So I tell them, if you do this, you can do this, it's going to cost you this, I think it'll cost you about this much money. And then they say, okay, great, and they go ahead and do it anyway. But there are times where I will say, you really cannot do this. And they don't.
Yeah.
So,
I think for investing into hospitality, so certainly our shareholders, GIC and APG, are, I think GIC is one of the biggest global investors in real estate. So it comes down to allocation, really. And so they're looking at diversifying the real estate that they're invested in, and hospitality is one segment, and it's quite small relative to other categories of real estate. But yeah, I think it's about that diversification, and I think but they will. So it's interesting actually when we are reporting to our shareholders, they'll be looking at exactly how our markets are doing, and they absolutely understand our hospitality assets, but they will be looking at how hospitality is performing relative to other real estate classes in terms of going capitalization rates and such. So they'll be looking at retail, they'll be looking at industrial, et cetera, because they're just invested so broadly. So we do have to be mindful of that as well. And when we're looking at certain markets, that conversation will certainly come into play. Yeah, great question.
great. Go ahead. Patient.
Thank you so much for your time as well. I just wanted to ask, what made you get into asset management in the first place? And why not stick with the operation in the hospitality industry, or maybe in a corporate role in the hospitality industry, and instead of managing it? I feel like those roles aren't very well known, especially for us who are still kind of learning about the industry and all the different jobs. What made you choose this position for the both of you?
Yeah. Good.
Well, so for me, I transitioned into it, and there were a couple of things. One is I find it fun. At the end of the day, I enjoy it because of the breadth of the things that I do. It's also, as a third-party asset manager or a third-party consultant, I get long-term contracts, right? Most of my contracts are at least a year long, which enables me to kind of focus on them rather than having to worry about, what's going to come next? Am I going to have, business that's going to be generating income after that? But yeah, mostly it's just, it's great fun.
Yeah, I mean, similar. I think, certainly I have some colleagues that worked in operations for a long time and maybe were general managers for a while, and then just, they were interested in sort of the ownership side of things, but that's not always the case. Some people, they're career GMs. It's a great career to have. I mean, certainly some of our general managers now, they absolutely have the key to the city. It's, they are well known in their cities, and, it's a fabulous career. For me, I suppose it's I don't know, it's tough to really have a plan. I probably certainly 20 years ago couldn't have told you where I would end up. So it's kind of a little bit how our company evolved, and I think also how where we are in the cycle that Matt just mentioned. So for me personally, I worked in investments initially and looking at our deals, and then maybe that got a bit quieter and dovetailed into asset management. So yeah, I think so. Some people do transition out of operations. Some stay in operations and move all over the globe and do
Yeah.
sort of fabulous things. Yeah.
I think it's also a matter of finding what suits you, right? So
Yeah.
I found I was with Four Seasons, and I realized I wasn't sure I had what it took to be the GM of a Four Seasons. And so then I switched into consulting, and then I found, and then at other points in my career, I've looked at doing deals, right? There are people that just do deals. And I was talking with one of the students the other day, there are people that do openings, right? I can't do openings because I can't handle the stress. That's why I wouldn't be a GM of a Four Seasons. And I can't do deals because I can't handle I just don't enjoy the stress. I like having a little bit more structure. So I sort of morphed into it. It's a matter of finding out like what I'm good at and what, like watching Hans speak as an entrepreneur, was just fantastic. And I can't do that. I don't have that gift, right? Of that, I am an entrepreneur in that I'm a consultant, but I don't have that, that great big broad picture and creative aspect. And so I find what suits me and what makes me happy, and rather than trying to continue to push into something that I'm not particularly good at or don't enjoy.
Same
I
here.
don't know. Can we do one more? You want to one more?
Should we
Yes,
go this
in the
way?
white.
Oh,
You've
oh,
been very patient.
We can do
Oh,
two more quickly. We
okay,
both
sorry. Do
pointed
we
at
both at
different
the same
people.
time? All right. Go
We'll
ahead.
go one. We'll
So-
go two quick ones. Yeah.
okay.
Hi, thank you so much for the insights. So obviously, as asset managers, you guys have a very deep knowledge of the financials of your properties. And with our panel discussion on dynamic pricing yesterday, I'm curious to know like what your thoughts are on dynamic pricing and kind of like the future of pricing within maybe your properties or just the hospitality industry in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we look at. I mentioned looking at market share reports every day. We're sort of looking at that pickup in business on the books. I think, this is really an area where technology is our friend. And this has evolved so much in terms of the revenue management technology that exists today. I think, the brands do a great job, but there are a lot of independent, revenue management companies. We work with some, and they're looking at this by the hour, by the minute, by the hour. So I think, dynamic pricing is here to stay. I think we look at, obviously, things like how many different room categories you have in your hotel and how do you price them differently. We've seen in some of our hotels, we have a very low paid for suite occupancy. So it's a lot of time used for upgrades and things. So how do you push to get more paid occupancy into those suite products? So yeah, so to answer your question, I think it's a really interesting part of the industry to go into because it is changing rapidly. And I think people who are really good at it, that becomes one of the most important people in your team for sure.
Yeah, one of the highest paid positions in some of my properties is the revenue manager because they can really impact profitability. And the thing I would add that I loved that Johnny had talked about in his presentation was charging more. If you want a reservation at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, you're going to pay more. You want a reservation by the window with an amazing view, you pay more. I mean, I think that's coming in certain circumstances, and it's appropriate in some and not appropriate in others. And I think the market will sort of sort that out. Anyway, sorry, and I know we're over,
You
but
get one. Yes.
Sorry, so just one quick question. First off, thank you so much for your time. So I just wanted to ask, from your experience, what are the 3 top must-have skills for hotel asset manager?
That's a great question. Thank you. A good question to probably finish off on. So thank you. 3 top skills to be an asset manager. I think you have to have, I'll think off the top of my head here, you have to have like the base knowledge that I mentioned. You have to understand, as much as you're constantly learning. I learn something new every week in talking to our team. So I think, but you have to obviously have a strong knowledge of what you're asset managing and the team. I do think you need good communication skills because you're communicating with so many different stakeholders and they may have competing, as Matt said, they'll have competing agendas. So you have to be a little bit, think on your feet, a bit agile. And maybe that's the third one, flexibility, I think, and that's more of a soft skill. I guess, I could think of lots of different hard skills you can have, and obviously with the understanding is the financial acumen, but agility, a lot of the job is thinking on your feet and things come up that you don't anticipate. So,
yeah, I
sorry
think
if that's
that,
a long-winded answer. Then
yeah, and I mean, communication is really the most important
Yeah.
at the end of the day. I liked what you said about flexibility too, in terms of, finance. It's easy to say finance, right? But it's really more than finance. It's almost communication in that it's translation, right? When we look at a P&L, it tells us a story, right? And I'm not like, and I'm the first person, if I have to tell you what, 52 plus 52 is, I pull out my calculator. So I am not a wizard when it comes to that, but I can look at a P&L and I can tell you what story the P&L tells you or what the balance sheet tells you. So it's that interpretation and in turn communication. So great. All right. Well, we're over. Thank you all for your
Thank you.
patience. Appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Let's give them one more big round of applause. I love how they touched on the fact that hotels are a cyclical business with ups and downs.
I'm sure delegates learned a lot from over the 3 days, and what a great way to wrap up our speaker sessions for YHS 2025.